Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the third episode of our Python web app series, Django. My name is Anna. I'm an event planner for Reactor, joining you from Redmond, Washington. Before we start, I have some quick housekeeping. Please take a moment to review our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. While we absolutely encourage engagement in the chat, we ask that you please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional, and on topic. Keep an eye on the chat. We'll be dropping helpful links and checking for questions for Pamela to answer live. This session is being recorded. It'll be available to view on demand within 24 to 48 hours. With that, I'd love to turn it over to Pamela. Thank you so much for joining today.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second session of Python web apps. Last week, we talked about the basics of building Python web apps using Flask and then adding databases with SQL Alchemy and Postgres. And this week, we are talking about Django today, and then we'll talk about Fast API on Thursday. So let's get into our Django slides. This is the link for the slides. We're going to put it in the chat so that you can follow along with the slides. The slides have lots of code that you can easily copy paste. They have lots of links that you can easily click on. So please do bookmark the slides if you'd like to be able to reference them. About me, if you haven't tuned into one of my streams before, I am a Python cloud advocate at Microsoft, which means that I help Python developers use all the different Microsoft tools, especially Azure and VS Code and GitHub, all the intersections of Python and Microsoft. Before this, I was actually teaching Python for a few years at UC Berkeley. That was pretty fun because I had 2,000 students in my class. It's kind of a big class. I was one of the early engineers at Coursera. I did developer relations at Google, and I also created computer programming courses for Khan Academy. Now, interestingly, at Coursera, when I joined, Coursera was written in two languages, PHP and Python. So we had kind of two different code bases for two different parts of the site. And I worked more on the Python side, and the Python side was actually using Django. So that was my first professional experience with Django. And that was really interesting, trying to figure out how we could use Django to build a highly interactive and fairly JavaScript heavy experience. But Django is generally a great framework, so excited to talk about it today. So we'll start off with Django 101 and walk through an example app and try out a few things in it. We'll talk about debugging Django in VS Code. We'll go over some like Django extensions, how to productionize Django, and then how to host Django on Azure. Now, if you are going to be following along with the exercises, you've got three options. The easiest one is GitHub Codespaces, and for that, all you need is a GitHub account. These are the two repos, two main repos that I'll be using. So if you want, you can go ahead and start building the code space now. One thing about code spaces is they do take time to build. So if you do want to do that, you can click on these repos and, create, I have three at this point, but you can click on this and create a new code space. And this will actually create a browser-based VS Code that has the project open and has everything set up to get it working. So if you do want to follow along, you may want to start building those code spaces now because it can take a few minutes. And last time people wanted more time for setting those up. So those are the two repos that we'll be using today. And I think we're going to also stick these URLs in the chat just to make it easy to click. You could also follow along with VS Code, especially if you have the deb containers extension. Everything that works in code spaces will also work in deb containers if that's something you like using along with Docker Desktop. Or you can try to follow along with, whatever your standard local setup is. You will need to also have Postgres set up because Postgres is what I'm using for all the databases in these examples. So let's talk about Django. It is a community written library. It has an amazing ecosystem. There are Django comps all over the world and virtual Django con. And it's just got this really vibrant ecosystem of people who love Django and who contribute to Django. There's even this Django Foundation that's in charge of running it and fundraising and all that stuff. So it's a great library. It's a great community. And what it actually is, it's an opinionated framework for server-side Python apps. And it includes its own ORM for database interaction. So if you're going to use Django, there is a particular way that you do everything. And I'm going to, walk you through what that way looks like. And the cool thing is that once you learn it once, you can, you kind of know how to set up, any Django app. The negative is that because it is so opinionated, you might find yourself fighting against it at a certain point if there's something very different that you're trying to do. And that's something that companies might experience when they're using it. But many companies do use it. So last I checked, Instagram and Eventbrite are using Django. Of course, when I was at Coursera, it was written in Django, at least half of it. It did move to Scala and the Play framework, which is like completely different thing. And that was for various reasons. Coursera did need more flexibility than we were able to get out of Django. We were certainly kind of meeting the walls of how opinionated it was. And then Pinterest also started at Django and moved to Flask. And Flask is, more lightweight and less opinionated. So it's interesting to see the, kind of evolution of code bases. But it can be a really good fit if you are doing a web app that is heavy in database interaction. Okay, so yeah, let's go ahead and look at an example app so you can get an idea for what I'm talking about. So we're going to start with this one here, which is the Django-pgflex-app, if you're following the links. And I have the code base set up here. Let me get this bigger. Okay. So this code base is all set up. And that means if everything's set up correctly, this code base should have a Postgres server running inside of it. So we can check ports and see that indeed there is a Postgres server. We can see that 5432. 5432 is the default Postgres port. And then we also have the app server, which is not running yet. We need to start that server. So this is a nice thing about how we've set it up for code spaces and dev containers is that it should set up the whole database for you. And that's because of what's in this dev container folder. There's this Docker compose that sets up the Postgres, and then there's dev container.json that sets up some additional things like the ports that we're expecting. So let's go ahead and make sure it's all working. So the first thing we need to do is run the database migrations. And this will apply migrations, which means it'll actually add any tables. Now, the truth is actually the dev container ran this as part of the setup process. So it's not going to make any changes, but I wanted to run it again just to show you. The next thing is loading the seed data. Seed data is example data for a database. Oftentimes when you're developing locally, you'll have a seed data. And Django actually has a built-in way of loading in seed data because it's such a common thing to have. And we just put it in a JSON file, and then it can load it into the database. So that is loaded. And now we can run the server. All right, so you can see it pops up and says that it's running on port 8000. Let's see if this port works, because I was actually having issues with this port earlier today. Yeah, 502. So I'm going to go ahead and change it to a different port. I don't know what's up with 8000 and code spaces today, but I was able to work around this, and I really hope my workaround is going to work now. There we go. Okay. So I don't, sometimes code spaces has bugs. I think this is a code space bug, maybe due to recent Docker changes or something, because this is basically running inside a Docker container. If you do experience a weird issue on 8000, go ahead and just change the port, right? So here I changed it to 8444 and then that opened up. And so all you have to do is click on this URL here. It looks like a localhost URL, but it'll actually, GitHub will convert it into a URL that you can put in your browser, right? Because if we actually went to straight up exactly this URL, this would not work because this would try to find the local host on this machine. but it's actually running on a GitHub machine. So GitHub translates this localhost URL into this GitHub URL that's going to work for testing the port. And now if we look at the ports tab, we can see that we've got the Postgres server running, and now we've got our app server running. And you can even see it's visibility private. If I wanted to like share it with all of you or with a colleague or a classmate, I could actually change the port visibility to public. And then this URL would actually be accessible by other people, which is really cool, very nice for classrooms and with colleagues and stuff like that. We're not going to use this as a permanent host. CodeSpaces is not for hosting; it's for development. But it's really, really handy for development. Okay, so here is our website. This is a space tourism website. If you caught the last session, then you've seen this website before. We have ported this website to every single framework, so we can see what's the same and different across frameworks. So we've got it in Flask, we've got it in Django, we've got it in Fast API. These frameworks are generally more alike than they are different, so it's pretty interesting to see in all the different frameworks. So this is our space tourism website. We've got the destinations, we've got the cruises, and they list the destinations. So here we're showing the relational database, right? So the destinations are related to the cruises, and we can click between all of them and keep following links around. So there we go. That is working. I see a question about where can you learn more about dev containers? Because it's a great question because I only briefly covered them today. I would recommend checking the VS Code channel. They've been doing a ton of videos lately about dev containers. So check out the VS Code channel. If you're particularly interested in Python dev containers, check out the Python Pulse on the VS Code channel. We have had a lot of sessions about dev containers in particular. I think I did one specifically about like Postgres inside a dev container. So check out the VS Code channel and the Python Pulse, which is every other week on Fridays on the VS Code channel. All right. So we've got that server running. Now let's take a look at the code. Django projects generally follow the same structure because that's what Django expects, and you'd have to make exceptions in order to not follow that structure. So what we have is like our main folder is the source folder, and that has everything inside of it. It has a manage.py, and that's what we use for managing our app. So you'll notice when we ran the commands here, all of them started from manage.py. So that is our manager for the app. If we look at that, so let's go ahead and look at that manage.py. You can see that the first thing it does is just set what the Django setting module is. So this is how it gets all the settings for the app. And that's from this project.settings folder. So project contains everything that is global across this app, everything that we need to know in order to set it up. And then, so we have that project folder. So that's got that settings, which has our, all of our global app settings. We've got ASCII and WSGI. So this is to run a WSGI application, and this is to run ASCII. ASCII stands for async. So Django does support async now. I haven't played with it much, but in theory, you can actually run Django using async calls. And that might be a good thing if you're looking for concurrency, and you would just have to use this ascii.py instead of wsgi.py. And then we've got these urls.py, which is the URLs for the whole app. So this is generally the same or very similar across all the projects. Your settings are going to be a little different, right, depending on what settings you want, right? So these are different like extensions we're using. We've got like our database setup here and say like, okay, we're using Postgres, right? You don't have to use Postgres. You can use a different database. So there's lots and lots of things you can configure for Django, and many things that people have already done, right? So if you're trying to figure out like, oh, how do I do cross-origin resource sharing? It's already something that's very common in Django. So you just look it up and you add it to your settings. So ideally, most things you can actually achieve by adding them to your settings. We've got internationalization built in, which is super cool. how we're doing static files, how we're doing logging. All these things are common across Django apps, so they've made it easy to configure. The next thing we have in a Django application is confusingly called an app. So you'll add folders inside, your main source folder that that we call Django apps. So a Django app is like their unit of modularity. With the idea is that you could have multiple apps within a single big web app, right? In this case, we only have a single app, which is Relic Cloud. But this is basically how we modularize Django projects, right? So if we want to have a section of our site for quizzes and a section of our sites for booking and a section of our site for surveys, a good way of organizing our code would be to have a surveys app and a quizzes app and a bookings app, right? This is also how we can easily bring in, other people's code, right? Somebody else can just say, hey, this is a fully contained surveys app. And we're like, great, we'll just push it, we'll just pull that folder in. So this modularity means you can organize your code, and it also makes it easier to bring in other people's extensions and additions. So now let's look at that Relic Cloud app. We're going to start with the models because Django is very database driven. So I think it makes sense to start off with those models, right? So if we go ahead and look at Relic Cloud models.py. So we bring in the Django models. So we are using the Django ORM, and we use Python classes in order to define our models. And these Python classes map to SQL tables, right? Tables in our Postgres database. So here we're making a destination. It has a name, it has a subtitle, and it has a description. We can have a cruise, and that has a name, and then some other stuff, and then it has destinations, which is a many-to-many field. So Django tries to make it easy to do relations between things, because it's very common to have one-to-many, many-to-many, these sort of relations between things, and Django tries to make it very easy to declare that, right? And you can specify like this one info request is tied to a cruise, and we can even say, oh, if this gets deleted, how should it, what should it do to the related key or to this one, right? So there's really interesting ways that you can customize these models. All right. So, and I saw a question about how to get started with this. So if you're just trying to get started with the one I've got open here, you just need to open up open the project in Codespaces, and then you can just run the commands, run these commands from the slides here, and that should get you set up. The Codespace sets up quite a lot for you. So in fact, you might just be able to just run this command here and get that server running. Okay, so let's go ahead and install an extension so that we can check out what this database looks like right now. So I'm going to look for the SQL Tools extension. And it looks like I've actually got it installed. Great. And then also the Postgres driver. Okay, and that one's also already installed. And I think these ones might already be installed because I use these locally as well. And I do have setting sync enabled, so it may have already installed these because I have them installed on my machine. So that should add a SQL Tools icon on the side, which unfortunately is just completely blank and empty. That's a Codespace bug that sometimes happens where the icons are just blank. So you just have to remember where they are and mouse over. So here's the SQL Tools. And what I'm going to do is add a new connection and click on Postgres. And I'm going to say, okay, my new connection is just going to be, I'll call it local. And let's see, the server address is going to be localhost because we have the Postgres running inside this container. So it's exposed as port 5432 on the localhost. The database, this needs to be whatever Postgres database we're using. So to figure that out, I can look at I can look at my Docker Compose because that's where I create the Postgres database. So the database is going to be ReliCloud. And then the username is Postgres. And then the password is also Postgres. So I can say save as plain text. And I'll set this here. So these settings for the SQL Tools extension, they just need to match what's in the Docker Compose, because this is what creates the code space environment with the Postgres in it. All right, and then we don't need to change anything else. And we can save the connection. And we can try connecting now. And we'll see if that worked. Yeah, it looks like it worked. The icons won't show up because of the code space bug. But what we can do is we can actually look and see all the tables that have been made. So what you can see is there's actually quite a few tables in our database. And a lot of them are not ones that I declared in models.py, right? So a lot of them start with like Django underscore. So those all come just built into Django. There's also a bunch of auth ones, and those are from the Django auth. And it just automatically sets those up. So there's lots of things that Django, this Django configuration does for you. And then these are the ones that I actually defined. And you can see they're namespaced with the folder name. So it's ReliCloud underscore cruise, right? So that comes from ReliCloud/models.py. It says, okay, I'm going to, make this table called cruise based off this class. And then if we look at it, we can see that it's got 5 rows in it, and each of them has an ID, and which, basically everything's going to have an ID. We don't even have to declare that here. It has a name, which is this one. It has a description, which is this one. It has a subtitle, this one. And there we go. So those are our 5 cruises here. And we could explore other ones as well. We could look at one of these relation tables. So this is a relation between cruise and destination. So Django set this up for us because we said that there was a many to many field. So if we put a many to many field, we're going to get a result like this that says, okay, cruise 1 is related to 1. It's also related to 4, and 2 is also related to 1. And this is what our association table looks like. All right, so let's try adding something. So this is the first code change I'm actually going to make. There were some comments about like whether I've done any code yet. I haven't actually made any code changes yet. All I've done so far is run the server and then install the SQL Tools extension. So now I'll actually try making a code change. So I'm going to try adding a temperature field here. So temperature equals, and this one I'm going to do as an integer field. Looks like we've got a few different options here, but I'll just go for just a normal integer field. Try this out. Okay. So I've added this line of code here. Now, I need to do more than just declare it in my Python file. I need it to become a change in the database. So in order to do that, first I need to make a migration file, and then I need to apply the migrations. So let's see how to do that. We're gonna check out the slides here, right? So here's how we make a migration. So what it does is it looks at your models, and it compares that to what the previous schema was, and then it says, oh, okay, it looks like you added the field temperature to destination. So it's actually made this migration file, and you can actually look at this migration file. So you can go source ReliCloud migrations and see, okay, 0007. It's a good migration name. So we've got 0007 destination temperature, and this describes the operation that it's going to do to the database. And we can also see all the previous migrations. So these were other changes that we've made in the past to this schema. So generally, when you do migrations, you do want to save those into your into your code versioning system so that you can reliably replay them and keep your database schemas up to date, like locally and in production. Okay, so we've made the migration. We still do not have that in our schema. Let's go ahead and take a look because we should be able to see it. So I added that to destination. Let's go ahead and look at destination again. And we do not see a temperature, right? No temperature here. Okay. So now we need to apply the migration. So I'm going to go here. And then it says apply all migrations. So it attempts to apply everything. And it says the only one that it actually needs to apply is this 0007. And it says it was okay. So now if we look back at this model, we should see it now says temperature. I don't know. You see that? It says temperature there. And then I'm going to go ahead and inspect it. I can see temperature here, and I can see that it is all null. So that worked. It added the temperature. Now, how could I actually, set the temperature? One way is to, run some SQL query. So let's see. I'm going to do an update, actually, not that. Didn't want to change that. It's a little tricky when you can't see your icons because you kind of have to guess what icon to run. I'm just going to randomly click around. Okay, there we go. Maybe. Let's try this one again. Okay, I'm going to open. Nope. Console. Nope. Let's see. Oh, there we go. I got it. It's the second invisible icon from the right at the very top. So in case you also can't see your extension icons, it is this invisible icon here, new SQL file. Yeah, Victor says I can Control-Shift-P. I can try that. It does sometimes fix it. So let's go ahead and I will Command-Shift-P because I'm on a Mac. And I think that is good. Nope, that didn't do it. Okay. You just want me to hard reload the window, right? Like this in the browser. Sometimes a hard reload of the window does it. No, maybe you want me to actually Control-Shift-P the, okay. So you actually want me to do the VS Code. Reload window. Okay, we can try this as well. Unfortunately, it looks like the reload. Oh, good. That did it. Well done, Victor. Thank you, Victor. That actually did it that time. Now we can see all the icons in all their glory here. Victor will be doing the Spanish version of this series. So if you want more of his wisdom in Espanol, you should join in July for his Spanish version. All right, this is so much better. Look at that. We get cute little elephants. I love it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay. So here we go. Now we can expand, and it's just so much nicer, isn't it? So now what I'm going to do is do an update, and we can use all the autocomplete here. So update destination, and the next thing is set, and then the next thing is temperature, and then, oh, it even auto-completed something nice. But let me go ahead and set the sun temperature. We decided the sun is really hot. Sun temperature. 27. Wow, that's really hot. Okay, we're just going to say 10,000. Where name equals the sun. Hopefully I capitalized that correctly. And now I'm going to say run on active connection. And there's no errors, which is good. So if there are no errors, that usually means it worked. And then we can click on our destinations again and take a look. And the sun has 10,000 for the temperature. So that is like the workflow for how we could modify our model, make the migration, apply the migration, and check out that it's working, and then actually set the temperature in the database. And then let's also just go ahead and set it to 0 for all the rest of them where it was null. Yeah. That looks good. Okay, and now if you look at this, okay, because I just wanted to have a nice number value there, even if it's not true. Okay, so we've got that working. All right, so let's move on to Django views. So I'm going to go ahead and open views.py. And at the beginning, at the start here, at the top, you can see a pretty simple view. This looks actually really similar to the Flash views that we've had from last time. And here what it does, it takes in a request and then it renders out the request with this template here. So these are basic views. They're not doing any sort of database manipulation. This one, destinations, is actually querying the database. So it says, give me all of the destination objects and then render them into this destinations.html and then pass in the destination. So this is, we're passing in a template variable, right? And that template variable is storing all the destinations that we found. So now let's take a look at destinations.html. And this is a Django template. It is very similar to a Jinja 2 template. So if you are used to Jinja 2, which we used in Flask, and we also just use generally in a lot of places, even across non-Python is popular now. Yeah, so it's a great question. So it looks so much like Jinja 2. It is so similar to Jinja 2. It is technically a different language. It's the Django template language, but you can think of it as Jinja 2. Remember how I said that we ported this code across Flask, Django, and Fast API? We used basically the same templates across all of them. So they're so similar. So if you can effectively think of this as Jinja 2. So we are using template inheritance here, which means we are extending a base template, which has like all of our good, styles in it, right? We've got our, our HTML and our style sheet, all our meta stuff, our icons, our title, our nav bar, all this bootstrap stuff. So we're using Twitter Bootstrap. And then finally, we have the content block. So this is the block that we're going to override in the, all the child templates for each individual page. So here's our content block. So we say, okay, cruise destinations. Here's our list of confirmed destinations, blah, 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 right? So, we can go ahead and change this like, woo, party time. Okay, so let's go ahead and see. Now, I don't know if that's going to let's see what happens if it loads. All right, so that did actually load the changes. So sometimes frameworks will pick up on template changes. It looks like it did pick up on the template change and auto reload, which is always really, really nice when it does that. Let's just do another test. Like let's add, we'll just use Copilot. I need emojis, Copilot. Just wait and hope. Thank you. Thank you for the rocket. Okay. All right. And then I'm just going to reload. And there you go. It is already updating. So we can very easily change our templates and test out that it works. Now, let's go ahead and add that temperature, right? So I'm going to go click on the sun. And so this is a different view. So this is the destination detail view. Now, this is doing a bit of a different style of view. Django has these generic views, which are tied to database models. And it's based on the fact that it's so common that if you have a row in a database, you're going to want a detailed page about that row in the database, right? So they make this detail view that is like just knows how to grab a row from the database and pass it into the template. And we can override it if we need to do some additional stuff. So in this case, we did actually override it to say, hey, we both want the destination and we want to grab those related cruises as well. So we can go ahead and look at that destination detail view. And you can see here, it passes in the destination. And we look at if we look at the URL, Django, this might be hard to see. It's /destination/1. Let me show you another one. So Mercury is /destination/2. So by default, Django will make these very CRUD-like URLs or RESTful URLs, right? Where you have the model name and then the primary key for that model. So Django does work really well if you like REST and and CRUD and well-organized models and all that. Okay, so let's see. We have, you can explore destination description. Okay, so I'm going to put the temperature in here. Temperature. And I think it was actually, I did it in Fahrenheit. Sorry. And yeah, let's just test that out. Let's go to the sun. And there we go. We can see the temperature. So that was all I had to do in order to add that new temperature column to it. And I didn't have to do much else because destination was already passed in. So I just had to access the column from that destination. All right, so there we go. Let's look at a couple other views just to get an idea. So here's another. So for cruise details, we also inherited from the detail view, and that one we did really simply. We didn't have to do anything addition, in addition to just saying here's the template name and here's the model, and it will take care of getting the right cruise based on the path and the URL. So if we look at destinations, yeah, let's see. That's no cruises. Okay, sun and earth, right? And here we can see it. And then info request create. This is an interesting one because this is actually doing a post, right? So here we have this form here. This drop down we need to fix. Oh, CSRF verification failed. Interesting. This probably has to do with code spaces. So I'll have to figure out why. I got this one time the other day on code spaces. Code space is going to be a little tricky to do. So Django is going to bring up that Django also has security built in, right? So for example, it does do CSRF checking and verification. In my settings, I'll show you my settings. What I do to try to get around this for code spaces is I have this. There's this Django setting called CSRF trusted origins. And I check for this global that's always set in code spaces. It's called code space name. And if it's set, then I say, okay, you're going to add the origins, add this to it. Oh, you see the issue? Oh, silly. I hard coded the port. Never hard coded ports. Okay, we'll have to do like a to do there. So now my port is 8444. So I'm just going to go ahead and unhard code. Well, no, it's still hard coded. It's just hard coded to what I want it to be now. Yeah, the port. We shouldn't have to change it to public. This should just work. So here we go. Let's see. Well, let's find out. All right, request. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, fine. I failed. Okay, we're on A444. Forbidden CSRF cookie not set. I think I have to. Did I restart the server? No, I think I have to restart the server for a CSRF change. I think that's what I had to do before. All right, we'll give it one more go. I'm going to restart the server A444, and open. Request information. Okay. We'll just go ahead and print out the CSRF trusted origins just to see what that looks like. It looks like Idea Robot 8444. I think that is. Yeah. You said you thought my visibility. Okay, this one's private. It should work fine with the private visibility. I don't think that should affect CSRF. I mean, I'll do it just because last time you told me to do something, it worked. So I'll go ahead and do Victor's suggestion of changing this to public, but in my experience, that shouldn't be the issue. Hello. Nope. Okay. So yeah, I mean, the good news is that Django is, has security as a first class concern. And it means that sometimes in development, you can run into issues like making sure your CSRF trusted origins actually does include your development server. And that can be a little tricky when you're in funky environments like code spaces. So I will have to debug that again next time. And also, yeah, and when we go to production, we're going to have to deal with that as well. So, all right. What's next? So we talked about templates. Now let's look at URLs. We have not looked at the URLs yet. So in the URLs, let's see. Oh, so that's actually, these are the main URLs. So this is URLs across the whole app, right? So we have, which basically what we're doing is saying like, well, actually at the root, just include relicloud.urls. Let me make this bigger again. Right. So at the root, include relicloud.urls, and then also set up Django admin as at /admin. So we're going to see this really cool. It's really, really cool. All right. So now let's look at urls.py for relicloud. So this is what sets up all the ones that we were checking out, right? So we've got the index, which is the root. We've got that about page. We've got the destinations page. We've got the individual destinations page. And you can see how this says it, makes a path and then has a placeholder for the primary key. So this says it's going to take an int, and that's the primary key. And this uses that, that view. And then we've got similar for cruise, and then we've got the info request. So this sets up all our paths. So you can see the URLs point at the views point at the models. So Django, has a very structured approach to how it organizes things, where it divides, it's kind of like a model view. It's a model view something, right? Model view controller, model view template, model view presentation, whatever you want to call its particular way of doing things, but it is clearly dividing up concerns so that if you're doing model stuff, it goes here, view stuff here, URL stuff here. And it's nice because it makes it more likely that your code is going to stay fairly well structured. All right. And I did see, there was a suggestion. I think we have the CSRF in, does it not have the CRF for it? Okay. I thought we had it in here. Interesting. Maybe I didn't test it on here. Let's try it out. That'd be interesting if we're missing that. Okay. All right. We're going to try it one more time because we like to fix things around here. So let's see. Oh my gosh, did that work? Very nice. Let's see if it ended up in our database. That's the test, right? And we see no data in there. Okay. That's really interesting. So what did, and here we see that it did a 200 post info request 200. Let's take one more look, and no data. Wow, fascinating. All right, definitely going to have to take a look at that later. But I think that may actually have resolved the CSRF issue. I'm surprised because I remember requesting information, but I might have done it in our Flask version of the app, right? Because we do have so many versions of this app. All right, cool. Okay, Django admin. So this is what's really cool about Django. I always am really impressed by it. So it includes a built-in admin interface for managing data. And this could be the reason that you decide to use Django, because it is a pain in the whatever to make your own admin interfaces, because I've done that a lot for many different websites, and it is such a pain. And Django comes with this built-in. So what we need to do is we have to create a super user so that we can actually do the logging in. So we can do that with this command here. So source/manage.py create super user. So username, I'll just say admin. This is just for local, so I'm not too concerned, right? My awesome email address, it's just not real. Oh, shoot. I don't even know what my password was. I kind of messed it up. All right, it worked. And it even checks to see that your password is good and mine's not good, but I'm going to bypass since I'm local. And now we're going to go to /admin. And now I should be able to log in with the super user that I just created. And this is Django admin. So with only a few lines of code, I have this full admin interface for administering my models. So we can go ahead and look at the code for this. This is it. So I just say, hey, I want to be able to administer my cruise, my destination, and my info request. And it'll just create that for you, right? And it'll always come with the groups and the users so that you can, set those up. So we can have Relic Crowd, we can add a destination, right? Like maybe we want to go to like asteroid shower land. I don't know. What do you no, it's called the asteroid belt. That'd be better. Lots of rocks and stuff. So cool. Family friendly. Temperature low. Okay. All right, so we save this, and then let's try adding that to a cruise. So we'll go to the let's see, maybe the Cold Planets expedition, and then I can hold down Command on a Mac to select more than one. So then I'm going to say save. All right, and now I'm going to go back to my app wherever it's running these days. Let's see. Let's follow this port here and check out the destinations. We can see asteroid belt has shown up. We can see the description that I added, and we can see it's part of the Cold Planets expedition. So there you go. It's just so cool. And so when I was at Coursera, I actually worked quite a bit on our Django admin, and I actually ended up completely rewriting it because we wanted to have like a JavaScript front end. But I still based it on top of Django admin. I just used Django admin as an API instead of a UI. But I still benefit quite a lot from it. I see a question is, can you do a bulk upload using the admin interface, like with a spreadsheet or CSV? I would be very surprised if you couldn't. And actually, we might have even done that at Coursera. So if it's not possible, the first thing to check is whether it's possible just in Django admin itself, right? And see if it has that, kind of an import option. If it's not possible in Django itself, I am sure there's got to be an extension for that, right? So I would just read Django admin bulk upload, right? So I search for that, see if we can do it in pure Django, or we bring an extension. So it looks like you can bring in an extension, right? And this might be the way to do it here, because it's just such a common thing that it's the kind of thing that people have done and put out there in the great Django ecosystem. Yeah. Very cool. All right. So that is our admin. And then we have the exercise, but we've been doing stuff all along. So what else would we might do? So we actually already added a new destination. Okay, so let's just do a little bit with the ORM. So change the destinations route to sort destinations by name. Okay, using order by. So this is just an excuse to look at the Django documentation for their ORM. So remember, this is its own ORM. So you are going to have to learn a new ORM. There's just so many in the world. Luckily, Copilot should know the Django ORM pretty well. And actually, the Django ORM is pretty nice looking. So we can see how to do an order by. It looks like we just say order by, and then we pass in what we're trying to order by. So let's go ahead and try that out. All right, so we want to do it on the destinations, right? So in this, we're going to say order by. Okay, well, there you go. Thank you, Copilot. Order by name. And let's go ahead and check it out. Asteroid belt is at the top. Very good. Let's order by temperature. Oh, I broke it. No. So we order by temperature. The sun is at the bottom, which is what I would expect. Now, maybe I want to do the other order. So I'm going to do minus temperature, and that should put the sun at the top. So there you go. Like pretty nice to work with the ORM. It's actually probably one of the nicer, or maybe the best ORM I've worked with. I don't know. You all in the chat can say what your favorite ORMs are. And there you go. So we actually did make several changes to this, and we went fast through it because we have limited time together. So there's probably only so much you can do at the same time with everything going on and all the bugs we're fixing together. But if you want to later, go check it out, try to make some of the same changes, make some other changes, and see what issues you run into. I see that one person at least thinks that Django's ORM is the best in the world. You might be right. I think it's a really, from a usability perspective, it just looks pretty. It looks good, right? It's it looks intuitive. Okay, so I wanted to briefly talk about debugging in VS Code. since that's what we're using here today. And that's, obviously my favorite IDE right now. So how do we debug in VS Code? So if you've done debugging in VS Code, you know that VS Code has this run and debug menu, and you can add like debug configurations to it. I already have 2 existing configurations for this app. I've got one for the Django app itself, and I also have one for the tests, so that I can debug the tests. And there you just have a slightly different configuration. Now for running the Django app, this is a configuration. They did recently change the type, so we need to change that in our code base. So it should be debug py. Python will still work, but you're supposed to say debug py now. So this is the configuration for the debugger to be able to launch the app. So basically we just have to say, where's the manage.py, Django true, and that we're going to run server, right? So it should do what we're doing here, but with the debugger attached. So I'm going to close the current server. Now, remember that my port 8000, the default port, is not working so hot. So we're going to do port 844. And that should run it on port 844 in debug mode. Okay. Oh, bring it back. Okay. And then I also just want to set a breakpoint, right? If we're using a debugger, that means we want a breakpoint. So we could go and set a breakpoint here, for example, on our destinations page. And let's try it out. So we can just go to our run and debug and say we want to debug the Django. Oh yeah, and I did it wrong. Sorry. Args needs to be a list of what you want to be concatenated to it. So this should work here. Let's try this out. There we go. So that looks the way we want it to look. So if you have the same issue as me with the 8000 port, change it to run server, comma, and then your port name. All right. It is running here. So I'm going to go to destinations. And you see in my browser how it's got that red. It's got that red there. That means that it is paused in a breakpoint. So if I come back to it, I can see that views.py is now open. So it generally opens the, whatever line of code, whatever code file has the breakpoint. And then we can go and we can step through it. So what we can see here are, okay, the current local variables are just request. So if we wanted to look at requests, like we wanted to look at, here we can see that CSRF token. Remember that CSRF token? Okay, so we can see that. See the session ID. If we're trying to debug some like user auth stuff, we could see headers. We can see the path that they were going to, so we can look at that request object. Now we're going to go and run the next line of code. So now we have that all destinations object. So we can look at this if we're trying to debug something about that. And then we can just press play to have it, finish executing. So if you are trying to debug something, you can actually put breakpoints where you're trying to debug and get better insight into what's going on with those variables. You can also add like watch expressions if you want to see, some particular value as it changes over time. So it's a super, super useful thing to be able to do. Now, what's very cool is that we can also debug our Jinja templates. So let's go ahead and add a breakpoint on the Jinja template. And then we also need to go into launch.json. So I'll stop the current debugger. And then what we add is Jinja true. So you can actually do this in Flask as well. And remember, like Django templates aren't technically Jinja, but they're basically Jinja enough that this works. So let's go ahead and try that out, right? So we've got the breakpoint set here. We've got Jinja true. Fingers crossed that it's gonna work for me this time. All right, I'm gonna load. Let's give it a second to load. Okay, and oh, we ran into the first breakpoint, which is fine because I forgot to unset that. So we'll just continue from that one. And then our breakpoint is actually in destination details. So I need to click on one of these destinations. And you can see, once again, that it paused at the breakpoint. See that red icon up there? So now I know that it paused at that breakpoint. So I can go ahead and see all the variables that were passed into this template, which I just think is so cool. So we can see the destination, and we can see that that's the sun, and we can see all, all the different, attributes that we could use in our template, and we can step through it and see how things happen. So that is really cool that you can both debug the Python code and the Jinja templates. There is one thing that I did in Django that does make this work better, and that's in your settings.py. You should set debug propagate exceptions to debug. This is going to make the VS Code debugger work. So just set it and you'll be happy if you're using VS Code. Okay, so there we go. We did that debugging. All right, great. So a few more things on Django. This is going to be more just sharing, sharing links and love. So to give you more ideas of what else you can do. So as we've talked about already, Django is very extensible. It's got a huge community, and there are tons of extensions for it, right? There's this great blog post that came out recently, which is 20 Django packages I use in every project. That's a good overview of a lot of these, but these are some of the most populars, and some of them are actually using them already in ours. So you can, if they're used as middleware, like lots of them, they're using middleware or as installed apps, right? So here you can see we're using Crispy Forms to improve our forms. We're also using Bootstrap, Crispy Bootstrap, which makes our forms use Bootstrap to look prettier. So we're bringing in this third-party extension already. So that's this one here. You could use Django All-Auth for enhancing your authentication, like if you're trying to do some, Facebook or Google Auth stuff. Django storages, if you're using cloud storage, like to store things that people upload, and you can actually connect that to Azure. So you could connect it to like an Azure blob storage and say, okay, when the user uploads their profile picture, we're going to store that in, in this storage account. There's Django debug toolbar, which is very popular for debugging, to the point where I think they're thinking of even putting in Django proper. So it's a very, very popular thing that that almost everyone, has enabled in their Django apps. Django REST framework, if you're building APIs. So if you're trying to make a spa app, which has, like a very, JavaScript heavy front end that's working with APIs, then you can use Django REST in order to expose CRUD APIs for all of your models and do that in a really nice, clean way. We got Django Honeypot for spam prevention. That's gonna, like add little like spam checks to your forms and such. So lots of cool extensions. If you are a Django user and have any favorite extensions, put that in the chat or the comments so we can share. We also have things that are built on top of Django. So Wagtail is a CMS, a content management system that is built on top of Django. So if you're trying to use Django to build a CMS, like, like a blog website or a content website, like a recipe website, that sort of thing, Wagtail will make it really, really super easy. So they extend Django with the sort of stuff you want out of a CMS. I actually have it running right now. I've got it running locally. Let's find it over here. Okay. On 8,000, my favorite port, but it is working locally for me. Okay. So this is a Wagtail demo, and this is for a bakery website, which has lots of breads that I've not heard of really, but they look really yummy. And then this, of course, has its own admin, and I already logged into it earlier. That's why it just let me log in without doing anything. And then we can edit things in here, right? So, this is all the ways of making a recipe block. So basically, like for your CMS, you define like, okay, these are the kind of blocks we'd have in our pages. So for this recipe one, they've got ingredients list is a kind of block that they have. And it just makes it so that anyone can develop this content without having to, write a lot of code. All right, now something cool I want to show is that they now have this Wagtail AI extension, and it comes like built in with tools that you can use to like edit your text, right? So let me find a different page. This one isn't my favorite. Let's see. Welcome to the Wagtail Bakery. Okay, let's try this one. Okay. So here's the bakery description. I am going to click on this one, And the Wagtail AI extension comes built in with AI correction to correct grammar and spelling, and then AI completion, which will try to like write way more. Just don't use that to make spam, please. I wrote 2 more prompts. One of them is the inclusive, which will make text more inclusive, and then social mediafy, which basically adds a bunch of blog posts and hashtags. So let me try social mediafy, see if this is working for me right now. Yes. So what you just saw is that it basically sent a prompt to an LLM with the content and said like, hey, add a bunch of emojis and hashtags to this. And so now we've got all these amazing emojis. And yeah, I don't know. Emojis is cracking me up. So how did I do that? Right. So let's go to settings and prompts. So these are the settings for this Wagtail AI thing. So if we look at social mediafy, this is the prompt. So this is literally the prompt that's going to the LLM. So it says, the user has provided some text, return the text, but scatter emojis throughout the text and make sure it is very exciting for social media users. So that's that prompt. I've got like the inclusive one, make something more reflective of global audience. Sometimes we don't do that well. These are the ones that come built in, like AI completion and AI correction. But yeah, pretty cool, pretty cool. So this is the Wagtail CMS. If this is, the kind of thing you're looking to build, definitely check it out. Once again, it has a great community, and I think they even have a conference coming up. You might also be interested in full stack Django, as in, I talked about this earlier with Django REST. Like you might want to have a backend API and then have like a React front end or a Vue front end or lit or web components or Svelte or just HTML, CSS, JavaScript, just vanilla, which is my favorite. If you want to do that, then you're basically looking for full stack Django. My colleague Dawn has a cool example of this, which is like a super nerdy Star Trek thing called LCARS, I think. I'm afraid I haven't watched Star Trek. Probably shouldn't admit here. I hear it's good. But yeah, if you're interested in that, you can definitely do full stack with Django, and you can find lots of examples out there for how to do full stack Django. Okay, let's talk about productionizing and deploying. So we've been using that dev server in order to run our server, right? That is the dev server. We should not be using that for production. We should see like probably, does it even warn us? Let's try doing just our standard call. So it doesn't warn you, but generally we shouldn't be using development servers for production. So what can we do instead is we can use gUnicorn. gUnicorn is a production level server that we can use to run all Python web apps. So we use it for Flask, we can use it for Django, we can use it for Fast API. It is, a great production level server that is, basically the go-to when you want to be able to run something at production level, meaning that you want to be able to have multiple workers that can, handle requests from users, right? So in order to use that, we do need to make sure we have gUnicorn installed. Let me see if it's in my requirements.txt already. It is. So it's already installed in this environment. There's gUnicorn. And then let me go ahead and run it. So we can take this command here. And I'm actually, in order to run this, to make it easier to run, I'm just going to go inside. So I'm going to cd into the source folder. And then copy that command here. So it says use gUnicorn to run project.wsgy. So that's this project wsgy.py. So that's what it's going to run. And then I'm saying to use 4 workers, and then I'm giving it a port. Oh, let me do it port 8444. That's the one we're doing today. Okay. So then it says it's running, and what you'll notice here is that it's got 4 workers. So potentially it could handle, 4 user requests at a time. Of course, it's just me, so it doesn't really need 4 workers. It's kind of overkill. But in production situation, we want to be able to handle, lots of users. So there you go. So it's running, and it looks similar to our dev server. The difference is just that this can handle production level traffic. Now, we configured that with arguments, but you can also configure that using a gunicorn.conf.py. And there's one that's already in this project here. And this just sets up all the parameters for gunicorn. This is according to, variables that you can find in the documentation. But the really interesting thing that we do here is that we dynamically decide on the number of workers based off of the number of cores in the CPU. So that's what the CPU count does. I'll run this locally so you can see, right? So I actually don't remember what size code space I set up here, but import multiprocessing. Multiprocessing.cpu count is 2. Okay, so this is this code space. It says it has effectively 2 CPU cores. And what this is going to do is say multiply that times 2 and then add 1. So this is the recommended formula from the gunicorn team about what they've seen as the optimal number of workers based off your number of CPU cores. So by setting this setting it like this, that means we can deploy our Django application on many different hardware situations. So we might put it on a small server, we might put it on a big server, and now our number of workers will scale dynamically based off the hardware that it thinks it's running on. Yeah, if you are, I saw an error about no module named project. Remember that I changed into my source directory. So if we run it from here, then you'll get that error, no module named project. So I changed into source. I guess I'll try running it from root. I can't remember if it's gonna work. Things are tricky with Python paths sometimes. But I can try it from root. I'd have to do source.project.whiskey. I think that we're going to have a path issue, but maybe we won't. Yeah, we'll have a path. Yeah. So it's Python paths are hard. You can set up things to work. But in this case, in order to run gunicorn, just go into the source directory and run it from there. And when we actually deploy it, we're only going to deploy that source directory. So it's just going to work, really well when it's actually deployed. So make sure you're in that source directory, and that's where you run that command. I see a question is the gunicorn is running as part of the code space. How is the cost charged back? Yeah, gunicorn right now is running in the code space. I still haven't deployed this anywhere permanent, right? This is still just an ephemeral local host sort of situation that is going to disappear as soon as my code space winds down. And all code spaces wind down. Basically all your code spaces, if you go to your GitHub settings, I was actually just checking it right before to make sure I hadn't run out of quota. So you go to your billings and plans and you check your plans and usage, and you can see your usage amounts, right? So for code spaces, I'm actually using quite a lot this month because of this series. Luckily, I still have quota left. So it looks like I've got 180 allowed hours, and I've used 50 of those hours, and then I've used 5 of the 20 gigs. So everything you do in code spaces is going to go against these 2 quotas. And then you remember, we're not using code spaces for, as a production host, we're using it as development because our code spaces are basically ephemeral. They will actually wind down after a certain period of time. And you can change that in your settings, not developer settings. Oh, the hardest thing is finding the settings for things. No, it's too hard. This is the settings, right? Anyway, there's settings for code spaces where you can declare what your timeout limit is for them. And so mine is set to an hour. So after about an hour, my code spaces will time out. I think the maximum you can set is 4 hours. So if I did nothing, this one would just stop working after an hour because that's my timeout. All right. So this is what we're going to use when we deploy it. So let's go ahead and talk about how we can deploy it. Boop, boop. All right. So in order to deploy Django, we need an app host and we need a database host. For our app hosting option, we need to think about how much control we want, how much sysadmin we want to do. Do we want to use, explicitly do Docker containerization? How much scaling do we need? these are our general options for hosts on Azure, right? We've got Azure Kubernetes Service, Azure Container Apps. These are both very much container driven. We've got Azure App Service, and then we've got Azure Functions. So to get started with, we're going to go with Azure App Service. It's a pretty good fit for it. We could also use Azure Container Apps, but then we'd have to use a Docker file. And we'll talk about that in the Docker workshop that's coming up. So if you want to learn about Docker, come next week to the Docker workshop. Now for the relational database options, we need to think about scalability once again, storage, read writes, replicas, backup policies, data sovereignty, all those sorts of things. We've got multiple options on Azure for relational databases. We've got several options for Postgres. So there's Postgres Flexible Server. And then there's also Cosmos DB for Postgres if you need horizontal scaling, right? So that Flex server can do vertical scaling, which can be pretty good for most uses. But if you really need a lot of scale, then you want to use Cosmos DB for Postgres, which will do this horizontal scaling. There's also Azure SQL Database, which is a managed service for SQL Server. And that can be used via this Microsoft extension that I found. So it is a little bit harder to use that than to use Postgres. Postgres just works really like out of the box with Django, but you can certainly use Azure SQL using this package here. For our example, we are going to use Flex Server. That's generally my go-to. Now, once we have this app service app and we have a Postgres database, they need to talk to each other. So how do we get them to connect to each other, right? How do we connect the app to the database? Now, locally, we're just using that really basic password authentication, right? Which was Postgres, right? Ideally, we don't want to use password authentication when we're in production because passwords are really risky, right? It's very easy for passwords to get shared, to get leaked, to get compromised. Things happen. What we can use instead is we can actually use passwordless authentication with Microsoft Entra. And in order to do this, we can disable password authentication. We create a Postgres admin. We have to create a service principal. We have to fetch it. Yeah, there's too many. I should just show the steps because there's too many. It's not going to make any sense. Okay, let's go and create a code space. Oh, not actually this one. Oh, sorry. We should be looking at the other one that we were doing earlier, the Django PG quiz. Was that our ACA for it? Nope. Got some deer. Django. All right, let's look at the beginning. Let's see. Boop. Django quiz app. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and look at Django quiz app. And here we go. So this is the one we're going to look at for deploying. So it's aka.ms/Django-quiz-app. All right. And I already have a code space open for it. So I'm going to go ahead and open it so that I can walk through some of the kind of tricky things we do here. So maybe first let's look at what the actual what the connection looks like in the app if we're doing passwordless authentication. So that is actually in this special file, which is this PostgreSQL base.py. And this is a way that you can override the way in which you connect to a database. So here we're saying that, okay, if you're trying to connect to a database, and if that database host ends with database.azure.com, then you're going to get a credential using this default Azure credential, which is actually going to get a managed identity credential. You're going to get a token for that credential, and then you're going to set the password to that token. So we're still setting the password, but we're setting it to a short-lived token. And these tokens expire after about 24 hours. So what I've done in the settings for this one is that first I set the password just to this placeholder because it gets replaced by that code we just saw. And then for this setting here, this is connection max age. So I said that this app needs to reset its connection every 6 hours. And so every 6 hours, it's going to call this, that code we were just looking at. and it's going to get a new token, and it's going to set the password to that token. And so this is what it looks like to actually connect to that. Now, in order to be able to get a token as your, app service app or container app, you do need to set up the access for it, and that's what is a bit tricky. So I do it in my Bicep, which is my infrastructure as code. So his is like where I declare my flexible server. We got like the Postgres version. And then I say, okay, I want Entra only authentication. So I'm actually disabling password to make sure no one who does happen to have a password can log into it. And then I create an Entra administrator for myself. And, set this one equal to myself. So that creates an Entra administrator for myself. Then there's another step where I have to create a role, a service principal for the app service identity. So we have to use this special function that's only in Postgres Flexible Server, where we say create a principal. And then once I create that principal, this is basically a Postgres user. And then I grant all these permissions to that principal. So now that, that my managed identity now has access to everything in the public schema from now and for always. So that's how we set it up. I definitely think that it's a little tricky, and we're trying to figure out how we can make this easier to set up. This is something we've been working on for just the past few months about how to make passwordless authentication easier for folks, because it is definitely a best practice to avoid passwords because of all the drawbacks of passwords. But it is trickier because, we've all been using passwords for so long. So yeah. If you're interested in that, that is taken care of by the Django quiz app. If you don't use that, you can use a password. In that case, I do recommend storing in Azure Key Vault. And, instead of just storing it straight in plain text as your environment variable. Another thing that we need for Django is a secret key. And this is used for stuff like, I think it's used for the CSRF token calculation and possibly for other stuff as well. So if you have any sort of forms, user cookies, and basically you will for Django, you do need a secret key. You basically always need a secret key. Now, locally, we just set this to whatever value. It doesn't matter. But for production, we need it to be a true secret value, which means we want to store that somewhere securely. So for Azure, we would store that in Azure Key Vault. And then when we want to get that key, we can either use it, store a Key Vault reference for app service or container apps, or we can even use the Python Key Vault SDK in order to get that key in the Python code itself. We also need to think about how to serve static files. So like our CSS and our JavaScript, those sort of things, right? Because we want to be able to serve them efficiently, right? We want to be able to serve them with cache headers, compression, that sort of thing, because they're going to be fetched a lot. And we shouldn't be using the same sort of mechanism that we use for, getting the Python routes that we use for static files. So one approach is to use this library called white noise. It is radically simplified static file serving for Python web apps. You can use it with Django. You can use it with Flask. You can use it with lots of things. It is very much set up for Django. So there's just this middleware that you add in your settings. And so we've got that in our settings. And you can do further configuration if you want. So what that'll do is it will add compression to your static files, and it will also add cache headers to content that doesn't change. That's one approach. Another approach is to use Django storages to serve static files from cloud storage, like Azure Blob Storage. And we have another example from my colleague Anthony, who shows how to do that. And that might actually be more performant. Anthony thinks that's a more performant way. So you do want to just look and see what works for you. And you could use both of them with a CDN in front. So you could use Azure CDN or Azure Front Door in front of your static files to really improve the performance and get them loading, really quickly at different global locations, right? Because you want your JavaScript and your CSS and images, you want all those to be super snappy. So this is one possible architecture, right? We can have our app service app that's communicating with the Postgres database using Entra authentication, and it's storing the secret key in Key Vault and getting that for the Django app, and then storing logs and log analytics. This is one architecture that we could use. So that's what we use for this Django quiz app, and I've got that open over here. So let's see. Oh, it even has the one let's see. Where's the one I was deploying earlier? Okay. All right. Let's see if this one's working. I've got like 5 different versions is working. Deployed. Okay. This one is working. Good. You can see it's not very exciting because there are no quizzes in it. This is a quiz app, but we didn't seed it with any data. So it is just an empty quiz app. But we can go ahead and take a look at the architecture for it, and I'll show you how I actually deployed it. So if you want to deploy it, the first thing you do is you log in to the code space. We do AZD auth login. And when you're in a code space, you have to do a device code login, which is the longest process in the whole darn universe. So first we enter the device code, then we say who we are, then we enter our password, and we put it over here. Okay. And now, of course, we've got a 2-factor. So I open my 2-factor application. I enter this number, Face ID, biometrics, confirm that we're trying to sign into that. And there we go. So I had to go through that whole process, but it's good that I had to do such a hop, skip, and dance in order to authenticate. And now we're logged in. And so now we can do AZD up. And I already did AZD up in this code space. So it actually already has what we call an AZD environment set up. And you can see that under my .azure folder. I've actually got a couple environments set up. So these are resource groups that I've created. So it is running AZD up on the current default environment. So what it's doing is looking at the bicep files. So in the infra folder, we have all these bicep files, and the bicep files are infrastructure as code that declare what we want to make. So we're saying, hey, we want to make this Postgres server, and we're using this Entra authentication for it. We want to make this app and this app, and here's how we run the app, right? So we even specify like that gunicorn command in order to run the app. We set all the environment variables. We set the secret key to the Key Vault reference. We're using white noise as our backend. So these are the only settings that are changing between local and production for the most part. There's a couple ifs in the settings UI, but this is basically what's changing, right? We're using a production database. We're using a secret key that's stored in Key Vault. We're using white noise for our static files. We don't really need it for local. We're also customizing the admin URL to be a unique string because we want to make it a little bit harder for hackers to hack into our admin. So we set that up, and then we have an app service plan, which has our SKU, what sort of scaling we want. We have the Key Vault. So we're setting up the Key Vault and just storing the secret key in it and making sure the backend has access to that Key Vault so that we're setting up role-based access control for that Key Vault. And then we're storing the secrets. Then we have our log analytics. So these are all the Azure resources that it's going to create. Now, as it turns out, it already created them. So it's not even going to make anything because it says, well, we're done. We did everything. So the next thing that it does is actually takes all the code inside the source folder, right? So now we can look at azure.yaml. This is how we tell the Azure Developer CLI what it's going to deploy. So we can see that it's going to deploy everything in the source folder to app service, and it's the Python version of app service. So what it's doing is that it's packaged up everything, and it is sending that as a zip up to app service, and app service is receiving that zip and then building the Python environment, installing all those requirements from our requirements of text, and then finally it's going to run that gunicorn command in order to get it running. So that's happening right now. Let's go ahead and look at the portal to see what it looks like. And so that was CodeSpace Quiz 2. Okay. You can go find it here. And here we can see everything that it created when I ran AZD up earlier, right? So we've got the app service plan, the log analytics, the Postgres Flexible, and the Key Vault, right? And I saw there's a question about Key Vault. Do you use the same key and password for everything in the vault? So Key Vault, I don't access my Key Vault using a password. I only access my Key Vault using, managed identity and role-based access control. And then I store the keys and secrets in there that that I have to have, like secret key. So if we look at here, you can see secret key, and this is not the value of it. This is the hash for the version. If we really, really, really want to see the value, we can do it. But Key Vault does make it, pretty hard to see the value, because most of the time you shouldn't be looking at your secret values. You should just be using them. So we only have one secret in here. We can add additional secrets or keys. Like imagine we're using like the Stripe API and we needed a key for the Stripe API, right? We would go ahead and store that as, a key here, and then we could, or as a secret, and then we could go, actually, I think we just do it as a secret. And then we can refer to that in our app service app. So let me go ahead and show you what the app service settings look like. So we go here and we look at the environment variables, and we can see the secret key. It actually shows that it's coming from Key Vault. So that's what we want to do, is if we're storing stuff in Key Vault, we want to use Key Vault references for our environment variables instead of just straight storing them in plain text, right? Because look how easy it is for me to show these values. You don't want it to be that easy to show a secret value. So you want it to, be this is really obscure here. Like I can't actually get to the actual value here. All I see is like, oh, it's a Key Vault reference. So that's your goal, is that if you do have to store keys and secrets, you want to make it difficult to be able to see that value. I also see a question about how much is it going to cost? That's a great question. Yeah. So I try to put, estimates on all of our repos. There's usually a cost estimate section. Let's see if I did it for this one. Okay. And this one even links to the Azure pricing calculator. So I can't tell you exact cost because it does vary per region. Postgres Flexible Server, you do get one free one per account. And then after that, it's generally about $12 a month. I'm actually running a Postgres Flexible Server, and it's about 12 or 16 a month, I think. For the small amount of usage I'm getting out of it, right? So it's going to depend on various parameters here, but just check out these pricing links. In this one, I say depending on usage, the most expensive aspect of this for me, it would be the Postgres Flex server. But it's going to depend on how many users you're going to get, and if you stay at these SKUs, and whether you've got credits or free account or something like that. So go ahead, check out the cost, check out the pricing calculator. Hopefully you can reason about that. Of course, when you're done testing something out, just run AZD down, and that'll take everything down, or just go to the portal and delete the resource group, and then you don't have to worry about incurring any extra costs, right? You don't want to have surprises in your Azure account. Okay, so that is probably still deploying. Let's see if it still works. Is it still gonna work? Okay, it still works. Good. I'm glad it still works. Still has no quizzes. We'd have to log into admin, but we only have 2 minutes left. So let's see what else I want to talk about. Additional security considerations. So another thing we could do is we could restrict the network access by actually putting everything inside a virtual network. That's the generally the really nice thing to do if you're making an app for a corporation and enterprise where you can access inside a VNet. And we do have examples that show how to do that. That will definitely cost more. Everything's going to cost more to go through a VNet. But if that suits your use case, definitely check out the example for using a VNet. If you're not using a VNet, you do want to set up firewall rules appropriately on your database. So ideally, you only have it set so that other Azure IPs can access it, and not that anybody else can access that. So you can set that up. It still means that random other Azure developers could, in theory, access your Postgres server, but they would need the password, right? So if you set the firewall and you use that passwordless authentication, that's a pretty good level of protection there. So consider your options for security there. Also, as we talked about before, make it harder to access that admin, right? So you can customize the admin URL. You can use this package that detects unauthorized access. There's lots of things you can do to make admin harder to mess with and to find. We have lots more templates for Django on Azure. So the one I showed you for space tourism, we have that available with the infrastructure for all these other possibilities you might want. So if you want container apps, if you want Cosmos, Postgres, if you want Azure Container Apps with the Postgres add-on, we've got the infrastructure for all of those. So you can just get started with that. We've got examples that use blob storage for media. We've got the VNet example. We've got an example that uses Redis for a message queue. So lots of examples to get started with Django on Azure. And here's some more general Azure resources as well that can be useful if you're just getting started on Azure. And there we go. It is 5 o'clock, and we had a lot of great questions and comments and bug fixes. Thank you all throughout this. So thank you always for the engagement. Thank you, Victor, for answering questions, and also everyone else who contributed as well. As a reminder, come join us on Thursday for Fast API. And if you have friends or yourself that speak Spanish, come to Victor's series in July. That will be in Espanol. So there you go. Thank you, everyone. I will call it now and bid you adieu. Adios.
Thank you all for joining, and thank you to Pamela for another awesome session. You can learn more about this series, view past episodes, and register for future sessions at the URL on the screen. That's aka.ms/pwa/or-series. If you have any feedback for us, we would love to hear what you have to say. You can find the link on the screen or in the chat. Our event code today is 22171. We'll see you at this time on the 13th for the next episode.